Hello and welcome to Heresy. We have always got the best guests in town, but tonight, honestly, if there's a better lineup for a radio show this century, I will give you a tenner, which, funnily enough, is the entire show budget. But they've come anyway. Please welcome Sir Grayson Perry, Desiree Buch, and doing his first ever Radio 4 panel show in 40 years of comedy stardom, Ben Elton. But there's no time for pleasantries. We've got some received wisdom to destroy. We're going to start by talking about eco-protesters.
We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the waterside. We shall not be moved.
Our audience believe that Just Stop Oil should stop throwing soup at masterpieces. So you've seen this. It's people that orchestrate protests in art galleries and so on. Ben Elton, why should they carry on doing it?
Well, I think it partly depends on the gallery. I think there's a fair bit of art that we wouldn't mind, getting thrown up. On the whole, I'm generally pro-protest, and I think doing it in an artistic space is really, in a way, quite apposite, it should be about disruption to a certain extent. And frankly, as long as they continue to allow the most celebrated bits of art to be surrounded by large crowds who simply only want to photograph it on their mobile phones when they can literally buy a beautifully reproduced postcard in the gift shop. If a bit of soup gets splashed on them, then all the better.
Actually, the gift shop's actually quite expensive. At the cafe at the National Portrait Gallery, I was going to protest against their price. I was tempted to throw a painting at their soup.
Get in.
Grayson, what can you say in favour of these stunt protesters?
I'd quite happily be their artistic advisor. I could give them a list. And the first thought that came to my head, because my particularly bête noire is kind of abstract expressionism, but the problem is with throwing soup at it, you wouldn't notice.
Desiree, are you a big art gallery goer? What do you think of people throwing soup at things? Would it affect your life?
Except for them getting their message across to more people, which I'm all for them doing. No, because ultimately the works weren't damaged. It was just some glass that needed to be replaced. The work they threw it at was a Van Gogh, right? Or Van Gogh, however you say it. The ear-cutting guy. The man loved nature, right? So it makes sense that we're celebrating the artist who made nothing during his lifetime from this work. All of these galleries are making so much money off of it, who are sponsored by oil companies.
This is an important point you make. These paintings do have glass in front of them.
Yeah.
So no real damage was caused. In 2022, they went to Madame Tussauds and smeared cake on a waxwork of King Charles. Now, if they'd thrown tomato soup there, actually would have made him a more realistic colour. But I think the king would actually approve of the protest. He knows we're in trouble, doesn't he?
People had the same attitude to the suffragettes. Indeed, one suffragette did throw herself under a horse and died. And there's no question that they are now shown to be on the right side of history. Probably the most gruesome phrase in the world, but I said it anyway. But I think the problem for the Just Stop Oil people is that if they're right and the world is going to end if we don't do anything, and it does end, there'll be no history for them to be on the right side of. I suppose the protest is the sponsorship, isn't it?
I'd like to see where this clean money is.
Yes, exactly.
It's is there some sort of dungaree and scented candle magnate out there they're willing to cough up $1 billion for the next refurbishment of the British Museum?
The women that threw soup at the sunflowers at the Van Gogh and the National Gallery have said we knew it was protected by glass and we wouldn't have done it if it wasn't. And one of them got 2 years in prison.
Yeah. There were sex offenders walking around and they got 2 years for trying to save the planet. Yeah.
Now, what about the roads? Because, those were 4-year, 5-year sentences. The protesters who stopped the M25, everybody that uses the M25, who sits there every day cursing this awful road, was suddenly, it's sacred, don't mess with the M25. What do we think of that protest?
I love having an excuse to get out of stuff. I couldn't come into work all week because these protesters were out on, like, I know that there were goods and services and that were interrupted, but it does make more sense to do it there since that's where the oil probably needs to be stopped using. But right now, the only alternative seems to be giving Elon Musk a lot of money. So we don't really have a lot of good answers for this. Like, I'm just like, bring back the diesel, drive a tractor to work, screw that guy.
I didn't realise the sentences were that draconian. Clearly, that is an outrage. But if they're going to give sentences to people who, willfully stop traffic and hold up the motorways, it should be the people who lay out the bollards and then don't do any work for the next.
But if they're not going to throw soup, what do you think they should do?
There's no right protest. There's no right way. I'm from a country that venerates Martin Luther King, a man that they hated. People hated him at the time. There's no positive, good protest. It should piss you off. That is what protest does.
And what about you, Grace? I know you once spent a week with some art students naked in a gallery. Was that a protest or an installation?
No, that was an installation. Yeah.
Have you ever done any protesting yourself?
I've been on a few marches, yeah. I mean, I always think of protests that quite often they're people who like going on protests. It's a nice day out for angry people, isn't it? Yeah.
Let's see what the audience think. Emma Brooks, have you ever taken part in a protest?
I banged on a saucepan outside the offices of Milton Keynes Council.
Wait, sorry.
Hang on, you haven't heard what she's protesting about yet.
Infinite amount of people.
What were you protesting about, Emma?
They were trying to reduce the amount of time that people would be allowed to talk in planning meetings.
That is actual democracy in action. Well done.
Well, I don't think we can give any more airtime to this protester. Where is Margaret Ranger? What have you protested against?
A long time ago, we did quite a few CND marches. It was in the 80s, and I can't remember anything about it now. Was that one?
But so, if you went on marches, why do you mind today's youngsters having their own protests?
I didn't really agree with throwing soup on art productions.
And it was processed food as well. It wasn't like...
When you marched against CND,
Yeah.
do you feel it was successful?
No.
Wait, sorry, what is C&D?
Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. She was marching for it.
We don't have nuclear weapons anymore, so obviously it worked.
This idea that protest should be judged on it didn't work, did it, is, of course, nonsense. This has been thrown at me because, of course, I failed to bring down Thatch quite comprehensively in the early 80s. To raise consciousness is what it's about. Back in the days of Kinnock's Labour Party, there was a magnificent organisation called Red Wedge, which was a group of tawdry alternative comedians and ex-punk rock stars. And for some reason, Labour at the time thought this could swing things. And I did a tour. I did a tour of 7 marginal seats, and there was me, Billy Bragg. There was a company called Fiasco Job. I won't give the whole list. Anyway, we played to sort of 600 to 700 seaters in each of these marginal towns, and on every single one, the towns went Tory with a margin of about 600 or 700, and that is the truth. But I claim it was worth doing.
Let's move on. Please be forgiving to eco-protesters who throw soup at paintings. They don't do real damage, and they are trying to save the world. Some protesters recently plotted to coat a load of Damien Hirst exhibits in soup, doing millions of pounds worth of improvements. And we all live on this planet. We should think very carefully about what we're going to pass down to our children and grandchildren. In my case, 25,000 shares in BP. Let's have our next topic.